I'm Lori Hoberman. I'm a board member of the MIT Enterprise Forum here in New York, and I'm also the head of the Emerging Company Venture Capital practice here at Chadbourne Park. And we host a lot of events for the MIT Enterprise Forum. We love what they're doing, and we're happy to have you all here. And we're very happy to have this terrific panel here on Cleantech and Smarter Energy. What I'd like to do is have my panelists introduce themselves. I've told them the rules of the road. So anytime we do a panel like this, it's a lot of fun to have some interaction. I've encouraged the panelists to interrupt each other and interact with each other, and I'm encouraging you to interrupt us as well. It's much more fun when you have a back and forth between the audience and among the panelists.
Interrupting Lori.
All right.
The rules of the road are there is none.
There is none. So you'll notice that his microphone was off. We can't pull that trick anymore. It only works once. All right. So I'm going to start on this end. May, do you want to tell us a little bit about your company?
Sure, absolutely. My name is May Shibata. I'm a co-founder of Think Eco. We're based here in New York City. We do cloud-based energy efficiency and demand response. So we serve all markets in terms of consumers, businesses, and utilities. So our flagship product, which is called the Modlet for the Modern Outlet, is sold on like Amazon.com, Walmart, Best Buy. It's very much a consumer product targeted at energy savings, energy conservation, make it fun for people to actually save energy. On the commercial side, we service large corporations looking to attain higher sustainability goals. And on the utilities front, our biggest program is with Edison. We're actually their R&D partner as well as their commercialization partner on this, where we run a residential demand response program on window air conditioners. So there are 6 million window air conditioners contributing 20% of summertime demand in New York City. And so when when it's hot outside, it's a big problem. So we help them to reduce peak demand on those devices. And we can certainly go into more detail as the panel unfolds.
Go into just a little bit more detail about the product. What is the product,
Sure.
the consumer product that you're selling?
Absolutely. It looks like an outlet. It looks like a jelly bean shaped outlet with two sockets in it, and it communicates wirelessly to a cloud server. So you plug it into your outlet, it communicates to either a USB or a gateway device in your home, and you can meter energy use at the plug. You can also set on and off schedules so that you can save energy automatically, and there's a phone app that goes with it so you can on demand turn things on and off. And when you combine it with our thermostat remote, you can do temperature-based on and off. So that's useful for window air conditioners where you may want to pre-cool your home before you come home, so you get your smartphone out, you turn on your air conditioner 15 minutes before you come home, or if you have a pet at home, you say, oh, it's 90 degrees at home, I should probably turn on my window air conditioner. So it's a hardware software platform. Everything is web-based in terms of the user interface, and our core asset as a company, as a tech company, is around the system configuration as well as the algorithms that drive the intelligent control.
Thanks. John?
Great. Thanks, Lori. So I'm John Cahill. I'm with the Pataki KO Group. I am also counsel to Chadbourne and Park. But just a little bit about the Pataki KO Group. A consulting group formed by former Governor Pataki and myself after his tenure ended as governor in 2006. I had served as the governor's secretary and chief of staff for 5 years. Prior to that, I served as his commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation for the state of New York. So when we got out, we wanted to stay in the energy and environmental space, and certainly Chadbourne has the platform from the legal side, and we saw an opportunity to help on the business development side. Bringing a lot of what we do is bringing business opportunities and strategic guidance to companies, both large and small, that are looking to expand their marketplace here in the U.S., in Canada, and in the Caribbean. So we are working with companies on very large energy infrastructure projects in that region. We're also working with a lot of companies from Europe and Asia that are looking to deploy new smart grid technology here in the United States, and we help them identify business development partners and business opportunities here in the U.S. So that's...
Thanks. Great. You're next.
All right. Thanks, Lori. I'm Mike Gordon, CEO of Jewel Assets. I'll say the brief skinny on my background and then some about what Joule Assets does. I founded Consumer Powerline, later C Power, which is the first demand response aggregator in the United States. Sold them roughly 2.5 years ago to Constellation. We had built roughly 1 gigawatt of demand response resources throughout the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. Much of it short demand response, 6 minutes or less. Fewer, less, I don't know. Currently, CEO of Joule Assets, my quote-unquote startup. I guess it's no longer a startup. What Joule does is we are a financing, consulting, and database company. So what we will do is we will build demand response and energy efficiency programs for utilities, governments, TSOs, DSOs. I'm sorry about all the alphabetical baloney. Yeah, exactly. And we will actually consult to develop programs, and then we will finance them. So creating programs which are constructive and create the outcomes that a governmental or a regulatory agency wants, and then having dollars in the back end and getting paid back from the results of success of those programs. Avoided copper, increased dynamic response, and as well financing some really interesting folks, potentially like some of the technology suppliers in this room. And then the third piece that we do is the database. We have built a database of all what we call the energy reduction assets throughout the globe, specifically the value, the vendors, the regulation, the response requirements, so that folks who are building software can access that database and build it into their software. Our basic vision is that we intend to fill in the gaps in the energy reduction asset market to build that marketplace in a way that is sustainable and rewarding, of course, for investors simultaneous. It is our intention to do well by doing good.
Thanks. Seth?
I'm Seth Frater-Thompson. I'm CEO and co-founder of Energy Hub. Energy Hub is a cloud-based energy management software solution. We, I guess, sort of operate in 3 different solutions with slightly different markets. We sell a software platform to thermostat manufacturers, essentially to help them bring thermostats online as new connected devices. And so if you're aware of Nest thermostats, Nest kind of has all the sort of traditional thermostat manufacturers nervous, so our business is very much about helping them come out with competitive Wi-Fi or other connected wireless products. That's one piece. Another piece is providing an energy management layer on existing service platforms. So if you've got a home security system or something that is a similar sort of subscription-based online system, we have an energy management layer that can plug into that and to add energy management capabilities to an existing solution. And then the third piece is we sell a demand response system to utilities, I guess energy efficiency and demand response. We're in a couple 100,000 homes now. We should be close to 1 million homes by the end of, I guess by 2.5 years from now, end of 2015, which is, moving toward about 1 gigawatt of load under management. And one of the things that we're doing right now that is particularly interesting is sort of fusing the traditional utility model for demand response with what we call the bring your own thermostat model. And so if you're familiar with what's happened in the enterprise where there's the so-called consumerization of enterprise, where it used to be that everyone got a BlackBerry, but then people stopped wanting BlackBerries because they had their own iPhone. It's essentially the same thing. If you're a utility and you're running a traditional load control program, you've got to go out and market to small businesses and consumers that they can sign up for these programs. Utilities now recognize that these connected devices are getting into people's homes without the utilities involvement. And so a big piece of what we're doing is helping to connect those two. So customers who have gone out to Home Depot and bought a Wi-Fi thermostat can enroll it in a utility demand response or energy efficiency program. And we see that as a huge trend going forward.
Great, thanks. Before we get started, I just want to thank my fellow MIT Enterprise Forum board member who is responsible for putting this panel together. Mary, you want to just stand up and say hello? Is Camille here? All right, so that's not going to work. But thank you. It sounds like an amazing panel. All right, so first question. Each one of you talked about demand response and your business's focus on demand response and energy efficiency. Talk a little bit, and Mike, you want to start? Talk a little bit about where you see that going in the future. Why is that such a key factor in smarter energy today?
Okay.
Is this a mistake?
I think in large part the growth of demand response in the United States is slowing.
Why?
Because we don't get it. We started with this capacity resource, demand response. We have this capacity peak load need. And that's our need now. But if we're building for the future, the need that we've got is this dynamic short-term need. And you've got these, you've largely got the commercial and industrial engaged in demand response. So what you're going to need is you're going to need the smaller folks engaged in demand response. You're going to need the mass market and the small and medium enterprises. And you're going to need shorter term response. Now, this is absolutely superb for technologies like you folks. I think it's fantastic. The regulatory structure and the utility engagement simply hasn't kept up. So you've got utilities underutilizing the technology capabilities of these fantastic folks. And so what's happening is it looks like a subsidy rather than a dynamic response to a maturing market, which is going to be more dynamic and intermittent. So our regulators and our utilities simply aren't keeping up with the future need. So these folks are relying on one or two buying centers in the utility rather than on mass market opportunities where, okay, you should have both the buying center at the utility and you should have mass market opportunities. And those opportunities, yeah, maybe you got them, but you're accessing 1/5 of the value, the potential value in the market. And as far as I'm concerned, it's criminal and it is limiting the growth of the industry. It's limiting the growth of these folks. And I'm telling you something, Europe is going to overtake the United States in a second.
There are some bright spots, though. I mean, so obviously we are pursuing, criminal consequences for everyone who's not doing this. But, a growing handful of utilities are now implementing programs that are directly aligned. Sort of the traditional DR model is you say, okay, well, we can only charge you one price for electricity no matter what time it is. So the sort of clumsy way around that is to say that, okay, we will pay you on an annual basis to let us do whatever we want with your thermostat or switch off your air conditioner. The thing that a lot of utilities are now embracing is this idea of either peak time rebates or critical peak pricing. The critical peak pricing has not really taken off yet because it's more stick than carrot, but peak time rebates are taking off. So now the three major California utilities, PG&E is a little bit behind, Baltimore Gas and Electric, and a handful of utilities in Texas now all have peak time rebates, and they're huge. They're $1.25 per kilowatt hour typically. So we've got programs running with San Diego Gas and Electric. We'll announce one soon with another California utility. Programs with BGE, et cetera, where, and this isn't really a program, by the way, we didn't sell anything to the utility. We just basically, we go to customers and we say, hey, there's a $1.25 per kilowatt hour rebate if you sign up for this program. Energy Hub software will automatically regulate your power use on a particularly high demand day, and you'll save money. There's no downside in it for you. You're probably at work anyway. So
Okay,
that's
rarely will I agree with you. No, I'll agree with you plenty, but rarely will I say that California is ahead. But California on this one is ahead. I agree
Right.
with you with critical peak price and
with PTR.
not
so much with
yeah,
CPP.
yeah. Well, critical peak pricing as well. California is ahead. Texas has some interesting challenges, opportunities, and in many ways they are ahead.
What about consumer adoption?
With
Are you seeing that?
$9 per kilowatt hour capped prices coming to Texas,
Right.
that's going to be
a big deal.
remarkable.
Yeah.
But those are isolated spots, and they aren't getting into the ancillary services to
Right.
the 1 minute markets, and where so much of the value.
Everything moves
sits.
on a different time scale, though. I mean, when you is it really 2.5 years since C-Power was
I know,
acquired?
it's fast.
Because that feels like it was like 6 months ago, and so that gives you a sense of the sort of utility time frame. Is that something that it seems very recent, but consumer adoption is incredibly high, right? There's about 10 million new thermostats sold in the U.S. every year, about half at retail, half at from contractors. We're
And
probably
every one of those is a missed opportunity if you're not engaging in the ancillary markets.
Correct, and we're now at probably we're definitely over 1 million, probably over 1.5 million, approaching 2 million of those 10 million are now connected devices, right? So between 3M product at Home Depot, between Nest, Honeywell, everyone's got a Wi-Fi or a Zigbee or a Z-Wave product. Consumer adoption is extremely high. We find that typically, and then a lot of home security folks like Vivint, Alarm.com, Time Warner, Comcast are including smart thermostats in their packages. We find that when we're recruiting customers for a program, whether it's a sort of traditional utility get paid by the summer, or if it's a kind of pay for performance, we typically get 20 to 30% of customers to sign up.
Does that follow through with you, May?
Yeah, I think generally it does. I guess the difference, or my perspective is a little bit different. I'm not from the energy sector, so I was a consumer marketer before starting ThinkEco. So, what we do well is we do R&D well and we do marketing well. So, we kind of treat this as a consumer, what's the consumer unmet need? And it's not really about demand response. It's not really about energy efficiency. The reason why people love what we're doing with Con Edison and the utility markets is that they get something for free that gives them wireless control over their window air conditioner. It's very much a self-centered, oh, that's so cool, I want to control my window air conditioner, and I didn't have to spend any money to get it standpoint. So we don't even talk about demand response because that whole concept just doesn't register right off the bat. What we are able to get through to consumers is that there's a need for conservation events on really hot days. And people get it, right? I mean, there have been enough blackouts, brownouts, reliability issues on the grid that when they hear that Con Edison would like to have a conservation event, that makes sense to people. So we try not to introduce a lot of the utility language into anything that we do. We've tried it, we've tested it. To recruit people, we do a lot of email campaigns. Sometimes when we talk about, reliability of the grid, demand response, all of that stuff, we get like a 0.5% yield. When we talk about controlling your window air conditioner from your smartphone, we got a 7% yield. I mean, we do let the market speak for itself. So I do think that demand response is fantastic because it aligns all the incentives. It aligns our incentives with the utilities, with the consumer market that, helps reduce peak demand. But the way we talk about it is very different when we talk to the consumer market versus, our utility partners.
And I guess I would take a different perspective on the comments that were made, just because my background is both a regulator and a government, if you would, policy guy. And because when I look out, what are the big issues kind of driving energy policy right now? And it's certainly the issue of hydrofracking, which I guess, and natural gas, and what's that doing to affect the marketplace, and renewables and clean tech, but also the issue of hardening the energy infrastructure. I think the recent events, the Sandy, et cetera, has really caused regulators and policymakers is that how do we basically harden our energy infrastructure, and certainly demand response needs to be an important component of that. And I don't disagree with the other members up here that New York may have been slow and that California's behind, but I would be surprised if we don't see a more and more shift on the policy side to basically kind of promote in a stronger way demand response in New York. Governor Cuomo's made it pretty clear that everything on the regulatory side on energy is going to be looked through the prism of climate change. And, how do we reduce our energy load? How do we make it more reliable without having, if you would, major government or even utility expenditures? And certainly demand response is going to be one of them. So I do think you are going to see a shift on the policy side to, help to promote, the types of technologies that we've been talking about up here so far. At least I would
Are you
hope.
going to jump in? Or should
I could.
All right.
I,
some
some folks at Con Edison don't get it. And when you've
I want
got
to know about LIPA. Anybody doing anything about LIPA? I
LIPA's
live
got
on
some
Long Island.
interesting. LIPA's got some interesting perspectives, and maybe it's because they're defending against privatization. But they need to move, and so they're thinking about how they move. But specifically, when you're throwing close to $40 billion at a problem, of course you're going to get action. And of course it's going to be, wow, we've got a federal trough, let's feed from it. But the question, what I think that the utilities in California are beginning to understand, what the utilities in Texas are beginning to understand, but what Con Ed does not yet understand. And I don't say that there aren't individuals within Con Ed who get it. There are. But what they don't yet understand is that the ultimate decision maker is the consumer. And if we want to build resilience, we need to recognize that we have to provide the value in the electricity markets. We can't be spending $50 for a $400 value, offering the consumer $25 or $50 of value for creating a $400 value on the grid and expecting that people aren't going to have their, aren't going to start to feel that this utility, that it serves the utility. So that if we want to build a sustainable resilience industry, the utility is going to need to recognize, as many of the California utilities have, that ultimately there's a business model in providing transparent and valuable and aligned service to the consumer and offering them the value from the energy markets in a clear, transparent, and aligned manner.
If they don't see the value, and frankly, I haven't had a conversation with Con Ed in some time on demand response, but then it's the role of the PSC and the governor's office to make sure that they do get it, okay? And, I think we should be seeing that something coming out of the PSC on this issue to push, if you would, the utilities that either don't understand it, don't want to understand it. It's really, that's where the regulator, because they are a regulated utility, they're going to respond to the regulators. If the regulators see this policy initiative, it's frankly their responsibility as regulators of these utilities to basically set forth the policies for these regulators.
That's great.
Mike, can I ask you a quick question? Sure. What's the 400 number from?
If you look at the value, the energy value, and actually it's more than 400, if you look at the deployment of devices like your device and your device, and the impact on the energy clearing prices in New York State, you're looking at tremendous impact on the rate base for all ratepayers, which is being provided by a subset of 10 or 20 or 30,000 folks. Mm-hmm. And my $400 number is a conservative number.
But you're talking about that not based, it's not the cost of deploying I mean, because that's a pretty normal.
It is like, what, $200?
A kilowatt? It depends on who does it, but yeah, 200 to $500 per home. It should only be $200, but sometimes utilities pay $400. And typically a home serves, 1.2 kW, right? That's a sheddable load amount. But you're saying it's not based on that. You're saying it's based on a combination of avoided cost of capacity and clearing prices.
Capacity in constrained zones, the capacity is worth somewhere between $100 and $175. The reserves is worth roughly $70, $80.
Okay.
The regulation is worth anywhere from $200 to $500 depending on what year you're in.
But I mean,
and the reduced energy prices
Right.
is worth substantially more across the line.
But I mean, there's a decent argument to say that the regulator should just allow direct participation of that load in a market, right?
I totally agree.
I mean, it doesn't really need to go through the utility.
Totally agree.
Yeah. I don't know why it has to right now, but it does.
I totally agree.
I mean,
you're preaching to the choir.
Right. Okay, good. We're done. See you later.
There was a moment of silence.
Are you done, or I heard, I haven't been in this part of the market for a while, but one example, I remember 15 years ago, my parents living in Florida got into a program with FP&L where they put a radio control signal.
Those are still installed, by the way.
Excuse me?
Those are still active.
And they work.
There's like 800,000 of them in FPL.
And
Yeah.
my parents never noticed the difference. Their air conditioner would go off for 15 minutes at a time. They would have to have roll and turn-offs that saved capacity on peak. And they worked wonderfully. And here this, it sounds like we're wrestling with the same issues.
Right, but so
a decade and a half later.
well, those programs. So that's a pretty. It's a cheap but blunt instrument, right? So it costs maybe $100 for that unit to be, for the device, and then let's say $100 to get it installed, and sometimes it's even less than that. The problem is that those. So the most basic problem is they tend to be one-way paging based. So utility, this sort of demand response industry likes to joke that it's sort of press and pray on the program. So it's you push a button which signals a broadcast message, and then you just sort of don't know what happens, right? It's like kind of like sending snail mail marketing. You don't really know what happens after the fact. So the most obvious problem is that 10 years after the fact, those probably let's say 30% of those are still operational. Chances are FPL is still sending checks to something like 80% of those people. So they know that more than half of the installed base is not active, but they can't tell you which ones because they're not two-way. So that says, okay, you've got to go in and replace the device. And so once you're replacing the device, it's a question of, do we just replace it with essentially the same thing, something that interrupts the air conditioning but now has two-way communication, or do you say there's additional value that can be derived? And that's where the idea of a communicating thermostat or some other, or a modlet or something like that comes in.
I'm trying to be quiet here, and I will try. However, I would say that we are in the 21st century, and it seems to me that the measurement at the medium voltage distribution level is good enough that we don't need to triple the cost of our device in each individual home to get a sense of what is actually happening. We can put the press and pray, in there. We can upgrade it. Maybe that's not the place where we want the high technology. If we want to put high technology in there, let the consumers pay for that.
Right.
But as the incremental cost of that comes down, then, and it will come down, it is coming down. These guys are putting fantastic stuff in. So anyway.
You have to assume that this stuff will get replaced, whether it's the utility does it. Some utilities are going to say we have an incredibly pressing need. A good example of the middle ground is, so we have a program with Austin Energy. Austin has about 100,000 homes enrolled. They have about 350,000 homes, and about 90 to 100,000 have exactly what your parents had. And those are over time disappearing. You call an electrician, he comes to look at, or you call an HVAC technician, he comes, looks at it. He says, "Oh, I'm just going to disconnect this thing. You don't need it." So over time, those go away, and the way they're replacing them is with devices that are being installed from Home Depot or Lowe's or your contractor. And the way they're sort of greasing the skids on that is they're providing an instant rebate. So if you go to Home Depot and buy a Wi-Fi device, and by the way, we don't really manufacture our own stuff. We're supporting other manufacturers, 3M, Carrier, folks like that. And then you sign up for one of these programs, you get an $85 bill credit. So they basically pay for the device, and then every summer they'll give you some small incentive to stay in the plan. And that's the bridge between sort of direct pay for performance and what people have been doing in the past.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement about this is where we are today. This is where we need to be, this being the time axis, and this is sort of adoption. But it's this classic marketing problem of, are we going to get there like this? Are we going to get there like this? Or are we going to get there like this, right? And is it going to be the utility that's supporting it because of all these old programs that are already in place? I mean, you had to take value on those for like 10 years to make it profitable, right? So you've got the legacy of all of that. You've got all this, this new market stuff coming, and we'd love to support that, but within an infrastructure that's already existent, we need these case studies from successful markets to try to drive change.
But is it so much that, or what is part of what we're really saying is the rate structure sucks?
Yeah, the rate structure is stupid. I mean, that's obvious, right? But there's
We have all these programs to leverage over the rate structure.
right.
To give us incentives for what we should have incentives to fight.
But right, but it's a political problem that it's obvious that you should have some sort of more or less. There's no reason to have sort of an abstraction of the rate structure, right? The way probably any regulated utility works is that they have, or it doesn't even have to be regulated. They've got a bunch of people who just do the math of about what do they expect the average price of power to be relative to demand over the course of the year, and then they set a flat rate. It would make much more sense to have the rate fluctuate and then set some sort of low income bar so that you don't have penalization of people who can afford it, and you do some sort of smoothing out of real-time effect. But for whatever reason, politically, that just...
So what would you guys suggest is the correct governmental role here in trying to promote what we're all trying to achieve?
Look at what happened. Look at what was done in the UK.
I'm sorry?
Look at what was done in the UK.
UK isn't perfect.
It had to be perfect, but half our pricing started doing a lot.
So I was committing that I wasn't going to speak until you spoke, John.
Oh, go ahead.
So, but you spoke. I mean, I'm pretty agnostic. I'm pretty agnostic. We will design programs, and our investment capital will go to where the rate structure works. If the rate structure doesn't work, we'll put our money elsewhere. And our money is not going into New York right at this point.
Yeah.
Our money is going into France, UK, Austria, Poland, Germany to an extent, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Illinois, Ohio, California, Texas. It's not going into New York. So if you don't fix your rate structure, fine, we won't invest. It's no big sweat, no big deal, no big sweat. We will, the winners and the winning utility companies as well, will be those folks who are willing to create value for consumers in a transparent, open manner, and who are leading the way to focus on innovative, interesting rate structures that reflect the cost of service for each individual customer, and that's where we're going to invest.
But I mean, I think my short answer would be that you need something that approximates the way the market works, right? Because the utility is always going to be paying a wholesale market rate. And so I think the consumer
Unless the
rate...
wholesale market is broken,
Well-
and it is often.
And so maybe it is, but I guess my knowledge beyond the wholesale market is non-existent. So you need something that is a smoother version of so it's got to be seasonal, it's got to be time of day, but it shouldn't be like Ontario time of day, like 10 cents off peak, 11 cents on peak. It should be 10 and 50 or 10 and 30 or whatever it is. So you need something like that, and then you need some sort of obviously carbon legislation as
You have a
well.
question, go ahead.
I've heard you talk about, or Mike anyway, about what Europe's doing, and I've heard each of you talk independently about what's going on in the market here, and I'm trying to compare these economies that are relatively federalized, doing their thing, and the US, which seems to be one state doing this, one state doing another, one utility doing this, one another. Why don't we have Or why aren't you guys pushing for some kind of federal energy policy? Or something that has to be federal energy policy, right?
No, I mean, I actually think the idea of our system on having that done by the states has actually been, for the most part, a successful program because, you know, it may be that New York State is lagging behind on the deployment of this technology and its regulators not, if you would, grabbing the bull by the horn. But you know what? California may be far ahead, and sooner or later, a state is going to catch up to the leading market. And the idea of the federal government coming down on the states and imposing, if you would, its own regulatory structure on its energy systems would be, I mean, just a non-starter. I mean, there's enough issues with FERC when you're trying to do something, you know, on a transmission aspect, but to actually have the federal government involved is another layer of oversight and regulation, I think would have.
So there
a
are
real
some things,
disruptive
right? You've got like
future.
FERC
Sorry?
745.
Sorry?
You've got FERC 745 and other
Mhm.
rules that are
But the
federal
idea,
government encouraging the states to do certain
and that's
things.
fine, and encouraging the states, but actually regulating the states and dictating how they regulate the utilities, I just think would be, it would not be acceptable on any, particularly on a state, local, or even from a utility standpoint. It wouldn't fly.
Yeah, I actually think that with respect to centralized initiatives, 745, 755, 719, 719A.
Tell a little bit about what those are.
Okay.
Put on other numbers.
You don't have 719A?
So 745 allows for payment for demand response, which roughly mirrors generation plus transmission rather than simply transmission. 755 allows for frequency regulation to be fairly compensated. 719 allows for ancillary services, the dynamic programs, to be aggregated if the individual ISOs ever actually live up to 719. It allows for them to create opportunities. In Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland has responded very well to 719. New York hasn't yet. So what we get in terms of federal guidance from the deregulated energy markets, in my view, in the United States, is far better than in Europe, where it struggles getting network codes and it struggles getting unified products, and we have no capacity market. So interestingly, we've got the state sovereignty with some federal guidance, and I think FERC has done a remarkably good job.
All right, hold that post. Go ahead, question.
As a consumer of energy, it seems that the stumbling block is what usually sits on the house wall, which is commonly known as a meter, which is usually dumb. It doesn't communicate. It has some sort of device that in New York, the Con Ed drives by and read off what the consumption was, and I guess transmits it to the central computer somewhere in the city. Looks like most of these devices circumvent that route, and perhaps that's going to be the silver bullet, where there's going to be a device that circumvents the meter, maybe makes it obsolete, and that, or it looks to me that if I actually required Con Ed to install the smart meter, the price was just prohibitive. They wanted installation charge. It was, I think, almost $500 to get that installed. And the payoff, there was no character, it was just a stick.
No, that's absolutely right in
So
terms
let's
of.
just repeat. Could everybody hear in the back? Yeah, okay, all right, we don't have to repeat.
All right. As far as the New York market goes, that's absolutely correct. New York, Con Ed will never install smart meters the way the rest of the United States has. And so, like in their, DOE-funded smart grid demonstration project, for example, they don't use smart meters, right? They use technologies like ours. They use other types of technologies to basically get around it, because at the end of the day, if you've got 300 meters in the basement of a building, it's actually very cost effective for a guy to just go and do it, versus trying to get any sort of wireless signal out from the basement after having, installed new meters with all the installation costs and stuff like that is just cost prohibitive. But that really is, an urban problem, right? I mean, so as all this money came in to install smart meters everywhere, the market sort of went two ways. there were markets where it made sense to do it, and then there were, large urban centers like New York where it just doesn't make sense. So that's why a lot of the cloud-based stuff that, companies like Seth's and we do makes sense for these markets. And, it's very much a different application in the suburban markets.
But the meter also it's not an application in and of itself, right? So, I mean, let's just be clear on one thing. I started a company with the initial idea of providing really accurate metering of devices. And I really 100% believed that was going to be the killer app for the first thing that people would do with the smart grid on the consumer level. And we have a lot of devices out there, thousands of homes who are directly communicating with their smart meter. You're displaying to the homeowner, whether it's on a little device on their countertop or on the web or on their phone, exactly how much power they're using in real time, minute by minute, et cetera. People don't care. They do not use those devices. And we made it was the best invention, or it was the number 4 best invention in 2009 by Time Magazine. It got a lot of attention, but people just didn't use it, right? Which is why we don't make that product anymore. At the end of the day, it's a question of what are you going to do? And so you're not going to not microwave that burrito because the price of electricity is higher. But what you are going to do is make general decisions and make gross decisions that are based on the price and level of energy use. And so by far the most significant of those is heating and air conditioning. That's why May's company does window air conditioners. That's why we do heating and air conditioning. That is 50% of your bill. It is by far the most important thing. And as of right now, the only really key value that I see for an end user, there's tons of value for the utility. For an end user from meter data is something along the lines of the following. I'm changing the temperature on my thermostat, or I'm changing the program, and it tells me how much more or less that setting costs. As far as I can tell, that's the only thing that is genuinely useful. The other thing is, I started the company in 2007. The iPhone had not come out yet, and it was still another year before the iPhone could have other apps on it. Most of these smart metering deployments started with the sort of pre-iPhone world. The result of that is so much more connectivity than there ever has been. It's completely unnecessary to use the meter as a network into the home. And so we all made the same bet back in 2007, 2008, and at some level even in 2009. But the bet was wrong. I mean, without question, the bet was wrong. We had our old device was called the home base, and it was this kitchen countertop thing that would show you all this energy use. The company that did the industrial design for that was called Smart Design. They're based on the west side. They had some sort of silly joke that was clearly just like a late night, 3 designers, too much beer, and but it got left in a presentation. The line was "Control is the burrito." And who knows what that meant at the time, but it's right, and it's what May said. The only thing that people care about is the control and the convenience as a reason for buying. At some point, when the market actually becomes reflective of the market, people will care more about the economics. But today, the economics aren't big enough. And so people use the economics to justify the fact that they bought it because it was cool.
But I want to underscore something. I want to underscore what these 2 wizards up here are doing. So what you've got is you're taking the direction of the cost of technology, and you're integrating multiple technologies in a way that provides value to the utilities. You're taking advantage of a declining cost curve, and you're integrating in a way that is simple, and you're doing it in the context of accessing, my view, 1/8 of the market value to value for the utilities. What you guys are doing is you're taking the critical challenge, which is why should we be spending hundreds of dollars on installs when we could be simply motivating people to install themselves? We're taking a simple modlet, we're motivating people to actually put it in themselves, we're training them. So this is the example of technology and human nature innovation at its best, but it's in an environment that, let's put it in context. It's in an environment where whether it's $400, $500, $600, $700 of value, these guys have to develop products which are costing $100, $200. Their buyers are the utilities, basically. They'll tell you they're the consumers, but basically they're the utilities. And that, I think, and that's the reason why we're accessing, in my view.
It's not really accurate though. I mean, over 90% of our installed volume is outside the utility channel. The vast majority of our products were either bought from Home Depot or a contractor, or a big box store, a contractor, or a service provider.
And then you're selling the utility on integrating it.
We're selling either the utility or a market. But unfortunately, the only market where we can participate right now is ERCOT. And weather-sensitive ERS this year it's a step in the right direction, but the economics are still terrible.
And that's exactly the reason we're getting 1/20th
Right.
of the resources
So
that
the
we
big-
should be
the
getting.
biggest
Your
problem is
businesses
just-
should be 20 times the size they are.
I agree. Absolutely.
Me too.
About 100 times the size.
Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling that it's not. We are.
I mean, it is interesting because ERCOT, as Mike said, I mean, it's 9,000. They've raised the cap to $9,000 a megawatt hour, which is $9 per kilowatt hour. But in the first year of weather-sensitive ERS, and we're getting there, but in the first year of weather-sensitive ERS, I mean, we're just like 2 orders of magnitude off in terms of payment versus delivered value. But that's fine. I mean, it's year one.
Okay, you live with it, but
All right,
wouldn't
so
it be
two,
nice?
hopefully, is better.
Go ahead.
10 years ago, there was a lot of talk about the utility companies competing with the telephone and cable companies for providing internet. That would have provided a great vehicle for transmitting a lot of this information to your basement and all of these situations. But the way I understand it is every time there's a transformer, you have to jump the signal over the transformer.
But that's fine. I mean, I have in my jacket and in my backpack, I have 4 internet connections, right? So there are internet. I mean, somehow quietly, I don't know who owns the water system here. Is it the city owns the water? Somehow, a smart water metering system was deployed in New York City without anyone noticing. Like, if you walk around, look at any building in New York.
Yeah.
There's a little gray box that says star. The word star, and then the name Aclara. And every single brownstone, and I think I don't know if big commercial buildings have them too, they all have a wireless water metering system. Nobody ever talks about it, but
Yeah,
I don't know why the smart metering networks for electricity haven't figured out a way to do it. I mean, it's obviously not Con Ed's fault. They're the customer, not the vendor, but it is possible. I don't see, yeah. I mean, at one point we were talking about like designing some device that we were calling the snorkel that was like going to be sort of a way of getting all the wireless signals out, and then we saw that the water system. Anyway, I'm going on.
Are we solving the big issues? It seems to me we're a little dealing with a small finger in a big picture of energy. I'll throw some other things because we're only talking about one thing. What about smart glass, for example? That would basically reduce your need for air conditioning in the
I think you have this
summer.
exact same problem because the market, the customer still pays 10 cents a kilowatt hour or whatever, and they just don't have the incentive. The economics just aren't there. I mean, there's no fundamental signal to the end customer.
And Mike was getting to the.
And this is all because there isn't a price on carbon, by the way, right?
Right.
Right,
But
that's
then
right.
utility potentially captures a lot of value. The consumer is only seeing a small slice of that, but the consumer is the one making the decision right now.
Right.
And so there's not enough positive decisions being made because they can't capture enough of value. Is that kind of it in a nutshell?
Absolutely. And it would multiply these companies' market capitalization by 20.
Isn't fracking, for example, 10 times bigger in terms of helping the United
So
States?
John was hoping somebody
Great.
would bring up fracking.
Now John and I are going to get into something on that. That's great.
I'm involved in this solution. I spent 45 minutes
Because if you're talking about, obviously,
Let's talk about real
a
stuff.
big issue that's changing the world, certainly changing the energy market, it's the whole issue of natural gas and hydrofracking. I mean, you know, New York is the last state that does not permit hydrofracking. I think that's going to change. But the reality is it's having a dramatic impact on renewables, the competition for renewables. That combined with what's happening on the regulatory front, on the air regulatory front from the EPA, is having an enormous impact on energy and environmental issues in the United States. The fact that these old coal-burning plants have to transfer technology to natural gas is providing, listen, it's an enormous cost to these utilities, but in the engineering, energy sector, it's an enormous opportunity. I mean, I'm doing a lot of work actually down in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has an extraordinarily high energy cost, from 28, 29 cents a megawatt, right? And they're all, most of it is from diesel fuel, is how they generate, I think 60 or 70% of their energy needs in Puerto Rico. There's an enormous need for new energy infrastructure in Puerto Rico, number one, to comply with the regs that are out there by the EPA, and also because of the cheap price of natural gas in the United States. I mean, I see issues like that as really, if you would, transformative for our energy policy, our energy use, and I think it's going to have, I've already seen it, it's had a dramatic impact on renewables in the United States. And it's going to be very hard for solar and wind to compete when you have natural gas, you know, at $2 or $3. That's the reality of it.
But-
And I think, you know, certainly on the federal side, you're going to see a waning of interest of supporting, you know, renewable technologies, from whether it's tax credits or DOE subsidies. I think you're still going to have support on a state level through the RPS that's going to want to promote some sort of renewable technologies in various states. But, you know, Seth mentioned the price of carbon. That's not happening anytime in the near future in the United States. I mean, you know, you have the RGGI program here, which I was very much involved with Governor Pataki. And I think while it was a great program that was designed, when you give a legislature the ability to raid funds that were supposed to be designated to either rebates to the consumer or put back into the grid, and now all of a sudden it's basically being paid to spend general obligations of the state, it turns people off in a very, very big way of supporting any sort of cap and trade program. So that's not going to be on the agenda on a national basis. But what is going to be on the agenda on a very big way is natural gas infrastructure, natural gas exporting. The whole issue of natural gas, I just think, is just where it's going to be for a very long time in the United States, and there's going to be further marginalization of the renewable sector.
But John,
because of
isn't
the
the
price of
main
natural
issue
gas.
that you still have this problem of oil was cheap because it was cheap to get out of the ground, right?
Right.
And so anyone, you know, who's just basic, we have tons of supply and it's relatively inexpensive, so we'll sell it for not a lot. That problem got worse over time, and now oil is much more expensive. Currently, natural gas is really cheap. We have a ton of it. We're probably going to just use all of it, right? That's the only thing we know how to do, is to use we use it all until it gets prohibitively expensive. None of us would care about energy efficiency. The only reason anyone cares about energy efficiency is it costs a lot to deploy to build the infrastructure to deliver the power, and that has high capital costs. And then it has a huge environmental impact, right? Mm-hmm. So if you put aside the first one of those, the environmental impact is what we care about. It's an externality right now. Mm-hmm. I agree with you that I don't have a solution for the political aspect of it, but so far as I can tell, that is the only. I feel like we're all kind of wasting our time unless everything we've been talking about here was, well, how do you get consumers to care? It's, well, the market has to reflect the reality. It's just the same problem, right? The market doesn't reflect the fact that natural gas does have a huge cost. It is much better than coal, provided that you don't have bad leaks, and you don't have to have a lot of leak to have a sort of greenhouse equivalency. But it's still bad. We still should be discouraging people from using it, right?
It's bad in what sense? It's bad in the sense that it produces the energy that drives our economy.
Of course.
I mean, and I am a big proponent of energy efficiency for the reasons that you just mentioned. I mean, certainly the idea of avoided costs, the idea that we're going to be able to build new power plants like places in New York City, that frankly is not going to happen. So we have to be able to, derive our energy needs mostly through conservation and through energy efficiency. But the idea that it's intrinsically bad, I frankly can't buy that, because it is the fact that matters that natural gas will provide the economic growth that we need in this country. Frankly, if we hadn't had the natural gas explosion that we've had over the last several years, you don't want to think about how bad the sorry economy would have been without natural gas. It provides jobs, and I'll tell you, for people who have been involved in the environmental community as I have, and something what frankly kind of ticks me off about at times the environmental community, the best environmentalist is a guy with a job. Okay, because somebody who has to put bread on the table, has to feed a family, is not really going to be concerned about the externalities of environmental pollution. That's the reality. The priority is going to be their job and their family. And when we saw strong economic growth in the state and this country in the early 2000s, that's when environmental movement was at its strongest, right? Because people had the ability, the latitude to be concerned about the environment because they were able to have a job and provide for their families. So until we get economic growth going again, the idea of having a price on carbon, having a cap and trade, it's not ever going to happen. The political realities are simply not going to be there, because even politicians recognize at some point the most important thing in order to push an agenda is jobs.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just think we should be explicit in saying that we are valuing economic growth over greenhouse gas, right? That is what we are saying.
I want to.
We have the lowest greenhouse gas emissions since the 1990s.
Hold on. I want to step in here.
It's not even close. We have gone well beyond, say, for instance, for Reggie, for instance, because of natural gas. All right, we've gone far beyond what we ever thought we would have achieved in reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the Northeast.
And we're ghettoizing.
And that combined with a lousy economy.
We're ghettoizing other economies like Europe in the process. So wait a minute, John. Hold on, let me finish.
Third world nations the opportunity that we've had as an industrialized country to grow.
But now, it's not yet there.
You're going to expect the third world nations to be held to the same environmental standards, the same deployment of technology that the richest country in the world does?
That's never
going to happen.
If you're sharp as a developing country, what you're going to do is you're going to decide that you're going to leapfrog the United States. And so what's happening in Europe now is that, yes, the United States emissions are down, but we're dumping tremendous volumes of coal into the European economy, and the result is that the European emissions are up because we are retiring coal plants, and our coal emissions are of course down, but the European emissions are up. It's a zero-sum game. So the question is,
the idea of dumping and coal, Dominican Republic, and I've been down to the Dominican Republic, again, the Caribbean, high prices of energy, relying on primarily diesel for very poor energy infrastructure. So the idea of building an LNG infrastructure for the Dominican Republic is, number one, cost prohibitive. They don't have the access to the markets. No one's going to give them the money to spend. So what are they to do? They're just basically stay there and say, well, you know what? We can't build those natural gas infrastructure they have in the United States, so we're not going to provide the energy that we need to have this economy grow and to get these people out of a level of indignant poverty.
So
right?
credit to you, John.
What's that?
That's where some of the renewables will go, because relatively speaking, they make much more economic sense.
They make more sense,
environmental
but
sense
they
than
don't
diesel.
provide, it's still intermittent power, and it's not a reliable source of energy on which to base your economic growth for a
So
nation.
they're going to have the storage and demand response industries.
Absolutely.
So credit to you, John, and to Pataki for building the RGGI initiative. I think that you guys deserve remarkable credit there. You were forward-thinking, and that had the potential to build a fantastic economy. I understand that the natural gas industry creates great opportunities for folks looking for a short-term fix. But ultimately, the question is, short-term. So the question is,
30 years he means.
Okay, 30 years.
so the question is, so my question is, are we just going to keep considering that we can solve this with technology, and as well getting to the point where our quality of life as a species is reduced consistently through the years. And for instance, we're not asking the natural gas developers to pay for the resilience requirements, the 40 billion here and the 100 billion there, that will be required as climate heats up and as our perturbation events become more extreme. So the question is, are we going to master this problem and choose to tread a bit more lightly and in the process build tremendous economic development opportunities for renewables, for energy efficiency, for responsive demand, for storage? Are we going to choose to embrace the technologies and the consumer behavior of the future and solve our problems? Or are we going to kick the can down the road and create problems for future generations? I, for one, don't think it's ethical.
All right,
I just don't buy that
you
argument
get to
that
answer.
natural gas is, by converting, you know what, you want to think about an environmental solution for greenhouse gases, and how about converting, imagine if we were able to make natural gas an easily accessible transportation fuel. All right? What would that do to climate change? What would that do geopolitically from making us no longer reliant upon the importation of oil from places, from people that are trying to kill us, right?
It would slow down the worsening. That is what it would do.
You want to have transformational? Let's figure a way.
Finance seawalls
What?
with it.
Sorry?
Finance seawalls for rising oceans.
I think we
with
should
it.
take some
All right,
questions.
so Yoram, thank you for bringing up natural gas. And I'm not talking about nuclear yet. You've been very patient in the back. Go ahead. Do you have a question? You forgot it?
Demand response, right? That was where we were.
We're going back to demand
Oh, yeah,
response.
I hope so. Tony Abate with NYSERDA. Somewhere back in there, state policies seem to get kind of a whack. And I don't often agree with Mike, so I thought I would stay up and publicly, state I agree with Mike that the marginal cost of, when somebody is reducing their consumption at peak hours, everybody gets a lower price, and that's a societal benefit. We don't often really quantify that, and it does, really add to what one of the value streams that energy efficiency and demand response can do. But I just wanted to, we talked an awful lot about the consumers, but just kind of give a high-level view of what I think New York State policy is generally, and that is generally to try to get the commercial and industrial customers that Mike alluded to, but, hey, we're in Manhattan, look at all these giant buildings, and, each one of them over, 10 or 15 stories is consuming 4, 5, 6 megawatts, and, there's, actually, I think we are in the most dense square mile, anybody from Con Ed here? We're in the most, 2,000 megawatts per square mile is where we're sitting right now, so the policy in New York State is to try to get these very, very large consumers to be elastic in how it is that they're consuming it, rather than make their grandma shift when she does the laundry. That's kind of the high-level view of what New York State is doing. So we are trying to get more people to look at the market prices and respond to prices and do it in an automated fashion. So that's, there's some things that New York State is not doing. I kind of looking at these issues, I every day talk to people in Texas and California, and I'm glad I'm not there because they're often trying to fix problems that they've made themselves. So New York State has got a fairly progressive but moderately slowly evolving system that's been going on for about 10 years. But generally policy has been not to make, consumers and grandma do things differently. However, Con Ed only cares about what's happening here in the geographic area of their territory. And they are investing, as other utilities are, in some demand response systems. So the regulators do have open cases with Con Edison looking at demand response. They've got about 300 megawatts of pretty simple, basic demand response, nothing as fancy as what Mike is talking about. New York State's got about 1,400 megawatts of demand response providing capacity. It's just kind of a perspective from the state level.
And the reason why Con Ed cares about the grandmas and the residential customers is because their system is only as good as their weakest link. right? So if you look at even the 5 boroughs here, Manhattan is a daytime peaking network because of all the businesses. It's a daytime meaning noon to 5 p.m. All the other boroughs, as well as downtown Manhattan, where there's sort of the Lower East Side and stuff like that, where there are a lot of residences, is a nighttime peaking market. In other words, it peaks from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. every day. And so those are the markets that, when the grid is stressed and it's a hot day, people go home, they turn on their air conditioners. That's where the problems are likely to occur. And, New York City is a very old city. So like Brooklyn, Queens, none of the feeder systems were really built to support the population that is now there. And so that's why it matters to, curtail load in those markets, because if one feeder goes down, it's going to put a strain on the next one and so forth, and it just, brings down the whole thing. The problem that we had in Long Island a couple of years ago. So, I think for the overall state, Tony, what you just said makes absolute sense. But, for everybody who's living here and sort of helping to keep the lights on, it actually matters to target those neighborhoods.
Thanks. All right, there were a couple of questions on this side. Do you still have those questions? Or you've been silenced? Larry?
Thank you. On the subject of natural gas, methane, as we know, is the major constituent. It is 20 times as potent greenhouse gas as CO2. 2.8% of all natural gas produced leaks off into the atmosphere. So if we tackle that, we can be a big step ahead. Natural gas, coal emits about 230% more CO2 for.
Larry, speak up just a little bit so they can hear you in the back.
Coal emits per BTU about 230% more carbon than natural gas. So conversion to natural gas in the coal process is a good thing. The price of natural gas in Europe is about 3 times what it is in the United States. And in Asia, it's about 6.5, 7 times. So it raises some export opportunities. The reason that natural gas is at a historic low in price is because of unconventional production, meaning horizontal drilling and fracking. And we could do something similar with petroleum if we get off our butts. As some areas of the country are, of course, doing so. And finally, in regard to smart windows, that's coming. And we have 2 inventions along those lines coming out of the SUNY system right now as we speak. One will darken the window. Actually, it's already licensed to a car maker by automatic electronic control. And another will determine the amount of sunlight that gets through due to nanoscience without darkening the glass at all.
Okay.
The least expensive source of supply by far is energy efficiency. So I think that we have not cracked that nut. And it seems to me that if we're smart, measured, intelligent, strategic, we'd figure out how to crack that nut before we focus on drilling solutions.
Let me take the.
We have had decades to crack that nut.
We could.
Never organized to do it. So let's get a little energy that will keep the country strong, protect us from our many enemies overseas who hate us because we exist.
I don't think it would be too difficult to crack that nut, personally,
All
but
right,
we
all
could
right,
talk
so
more about that.
Hold that. Go ahead. Question.
The only issue that, just in comment, what people are forgetting is that when you talk about natural gas, it's a balkanized financial market for natural gas. The minute you start shipping natural gas out of the U.S., it's over. You have then one global market and one global price. The price escalation that people are going to see with natural gas is just going to expand, which goes back to Mike's point as regards to then you have to turn back to what is the cheapest source of energy. The cheapest source of energy is not going to be natural gas in 10 years. Because once you begin selling it overseas and once you have a global market, the price elasticity goes away.
It's just wrong statement.
No.
You see, if it costs you $1 and you sell for 10, it still costs you $1. You sell and get the maximum price. In Saudi, it used to cost $2, and they sold it for 40 to 100. There's nothing. The two are non-related. If we sell it at the global market, we just the United States would make more money. There's nothing wrong with that. The taxpayer would benefit. So you can do other things. But just bad economics.
But it will change our thinking of it being a cheap source of energy.
And that's
That's one of the.
you know, and actually that goes again to what's the real price of energy, right? I mean, the externalities. At what point do they get captured in the price of energy? And so yes, I mean, but a global market, if it makes it, if you would, more expensive, and to this gentleman's point, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, at some point, the market, a global market, will find the real cost of energy, and it
So
should
we
be
should once
either
again
directly or
loot
indirectly
the
subsidized.
developing world.
What's
Yeah,
that?
but-
So we should once again loot the developing
Well,
world.
but what I mean, he's saying loot the developing world, but I just don't understand why.
Export that coal.
Why have a conversation that, I mean, it's, I mean, the reality is there is a cost of energy, right? We don't see the cost of energy. I feel like the whole world will be, it's not free, right? It just delays it. So the whole world will be better off if we find the real cost of energy, because that will address the issue of renewables not being competitive. That will eventually drive drive solutions to the intermittency of renewables. That might make nuclear
Seth, I would
competitive.
be all supportive about capturing the externalities of energy. It's just that in this political climate, it's totally unrealistic to think that that's going to happen anytime soon. And that's the reality. It's just not. We're not going to have a carbon tax. We're not going to have a cap and trade. It's not happening politically. Yes, there may be Reggie, and California has its own program, but to think as a nation that we are going to take that steps, it's just not. It's not in the cards.
All right, one question, go ahead.
I think this is an observation. I heard what everybody said. Anybody has
Speak.
a point.
Speak.
One thing in terms of the geopolitics, the world is changing. The Middle East itself, you've seen much more nuclear capacities for countries to go and decide to build plants. This will have ramifications worldwide. The U.S. is not the only superpower today. In a sense, the system is fragmented. So by design, you'll see much more nuclear capacity that will spill over, obviously, into energy, into whatever it is. What's your comment as far as this? How do you see the role of nuclear energy in general for the U.S. and the world?
If you're asking me, Price-Anderson is the biggest subsidy that we've got in the United States. From my perspective, if we were to allow nuclear as well as hydrofracking and other technologies to self-insure to the full degree of exposure, we wouldn't see this kind of development.
Well, if we're in a perfect world, I don't think we'd see subsidies of any energy source. We'd let the markets decide. But I do think that nuclear is going to be an important component of, if you would, the global energy mix. I think, the tragedy of Japan, I think, while it may have been an initial hindrance for further nuclear, I know that in Hungary, they're looking at building 2 nuclear plants. I mean, I think the idea of nations to be self-sufficient of energy and not having to rely upon whether it's Russia or the Middle East for their energy sources are going to drive that, because there is a political cost, if you would, to being dependent upon a foreign source of energy. And I think the Eastern Europeans recognize that. We've seen that here in the United States, the cost of actually being dependent upon foreign sources of energy. So, and that's not really, if you would, taken into account at the pump, if you would. So I do think you're going to see increased interest in nuclear development, and whether that happens here in any big way in the United States, I tend to doubt that for the reasons of the market, and I don't think you'll have the government willing to come in and subsidize it. But and particularly when you see the explosion of natural gas, but I do see in Europe, and Eastern Europe in particular, that there is a real keen interest in developing nuclear energy facilities.
Okay. Any comments, last minute comments on
I
that?
like that we ended it on a depressing note.
I don't see, to have Poland and Hungary not dependent upon Russia for its gas and oil, that's a very good thing. It's a very good thing.
On that note, do you have any last, no, all right, good.
Don't give us a chance.
Except that I disagree on
All
Eastern
right.
Europe and
All
Europe
right.
with respect to nuclear. It's not happening.
So let's end this on a positive. I want to say control is in the burrito.
No, I can't take credit for that. Control is the burrito.
Control is the burrito.
But
I'm
some
I'm
other
just gonna
people from a
remember
different
that.
company are responsible for that.
Thank you, my wonderful panel. You guys were amazing. It's just the controversy I wanted. And thank you, audience. You were terrific. Go enjoy some networking, some food. Thanks for coming. You guys were great.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Laurie.
Hey,